Picture this. It's 1944, and you're a high-ranking military official sitting in a Washington, D.C. conference room when Harvard psychologist B.F. Skinner walks in with a proposal to solve your guided missile problem. Radar isn't reliable, radio guidance keeps getting jammed, you need something better. Skinner clicks on his projector, and on the screen appears not a schematic or a mechanical design, but an actual pigeon inside a missile, pecking at a screen, steering a bomb towards its target with its beak. You look at Skinner. He's dead serious. And here's the thing. It actually worked. Today on Cracking the Shell, we're telling the story of Project Pigeon, the most audacious, bizarre, and scientifically brilliant weapons program you've never heard of, and why, despite everything, the military said no. I'm Mike Doherty, and you're listening to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science.
Let's go. Cracking the shell on the mic, psychological science in sight. Abby bringing that fire, sparks when she speaks, ignition on sight. Been with the breakdown, mind state, takedown, never miss the details. Mike hitting concepts heavy like freight trains on steel rails. Joey steady mapping brainwaves, decoding how we feel. They turn that abstract real. Yeah, the knowledge is real. They peel it back slow, layer after layer. Mind so deep, yeah, we ride that elevator. Cracking the shell.
Welcome to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. I'm Joey Barnett.
And I'm Mike Doherty. And Joey, I have to tell you, this is going to be an interesting episode.
I know, right? And I promise this is 100% real, even though it doesn't seem like it. Today, we're going to be talking about Project Pigeon. This is B.F. Skinner's absolutely wild attempt to create guided missiles using real pigeons during World War II.
You know, when I think about behaviorism or operant conditioning, my brain sometimes sort of shuts down and I don't usually find it an interesting topic. But
same here, to be honest with you.
And this is an example of why this work was so relevant.
Right. I'm really intrigued by this. So maybe can you set the scene for us? When did this happen and what happened?
All right. So we're talking about World War II. So the early 1940s. The war was raging, obviously. The Allies were starting to engage in their bombing campaign, launching planes across Western Europe, and they encountered this huge problem. Their big challenge was getting the bombs to go where they wanted them to go. So They were dropping these bombs, and they were just basically flying objects pulled down by gravity and pushed around by air.
Right, because if you combine gravity and wind, and you have moving targets, there's probably going to be a lot of missing, right?
Yeah, and layer on top of that, of course, you're being, fired on by these anti-aircraft guns and fighters flying around you trying to shoot you down. So not exactly an ideal condition to be trying to drop bombs.
Right.
Let's just put this succinctly, that the military was desperately trying to figure out some way that they could develop what we would call today as, basically a guided missile.
Okay.
Or what we might call smart bombs, right? So here's the thing, though, right? The electronic capabilities or the technology just wasn't where it needed to be for this to be sort of an electronically guided missile.
Right.
So they had to come up with some other way of doing it.
And that's when Skinner said, who's one of the most famous psychologists of the 20th century, right? That's when he steps up and he's like, hey, I've got an idea. What if we just use pigeons?
I know. And in pigeons, of all things, right? Imagine walking into a room full of generals and saying, hey, I got an idea. Let's use these pigeons to guide these bombs. I mean, it just seems like so far-fetched.
Right. But Skinner, he had been studying pigeon behavior, right, for quite some time. He knew that pigeons had extraordinary vision. And he knew that they could see things that we as human beings can't even really perceive, right?
Right. And we already knew at that point that pigeons had been used for millennia to send messages from point A to point B. So they had exceptional spatial abilities.
Right. They have spatial abilities, they have navigational abilities, and they can also be trained through operant conditioning, which is, Skinner's big work, right? That's his whole thing, right? Operant conditioning. And of course, pigeons also, they also happen to stay calm, right? During stress. They don't panic, right?
That's right. They just simply fly off when you're trying to step on them.
Yep,
just think about your everyday experience with the bird, right?
Right.
So here's what Skinner had in mind, right? So he's essentially thinking that we have these creatures that we can train, and they have these exceptional abilities. Why don't we train them to guide these bombs to the locations we want the bombs to land?
Yeah, and super smart, right? Because, at this point, this is just to set the context. This is the 1940s, right? And there's no advanced electronics. There's no GPS systems or anything like that. This is really a natural, organic guidance system that really makes a lot of sense in this context, right?
Right, exactly. And, I guess the main question is like, how on earth do you get a pigeon to guide a bomb?
Right. So I guess my understanding is that the basic setup was like this. You'd have a missile called the Pelican. In the nose cone, you'd install 1 to 3 pigeons.
I guess I didn't know this part. So 1 to 3 pigeons, not just a single pigeon?
Right. Redundancy, right? So same reason modern systems have backup computers. If you have multiple pigeons, one of them is having a bad day or an off day, the other 2 get to outvote it, right? It's majority rules kind of thing.
Yeah, perfect. So that's actually quite smart. So, okay, go ahead and continue.
Yeah, so the pigeons, I think they're harnessed in front of a screen, basically a projection screen. It kind of shows the view ahead of the missile. And as the missile flies, the pigeons actually see what is coming.
So they're being trained on what to recognize, right? So so they know what the target is, and they're essentially trained to identify the target in the field.
Exactly. And this is exactly where operant conditioning, Skinner's operant conditioning comes in, right? The pigeons were shown specific images of targets. Maybe we could say they were shown an image of a factory or a bridge, a ship, right? And every time they pecked at that image, guess what? They got a reward, right? They got a food reward, whether it was, maybe grains or seeds, whatever they loved, right?
So this is just classical operant conditioning, right? But now not applied to some sort of artificial psychological experiment, but moving it into a field experiment in some ways, right?
Exactly, right. So now you have these pigeons, they're absolutely obsessed with pecking at battleships, right? They see a battleship, they peck.
That's right.
It's basically intuitive at this point, right? It's automatic. It's compulsive.
All right. So the pigeon sees the target on the screen, that pecks at it. But do you want to elaborate on how this might be used to steer the bomb?
Yeah. So the pigeon's beaks, or in some designs, perhaps their heads, they were connected to sensors. And so then when the bomb was flying straight towards the target would appear centered on the screen. The pigeon would then peck at the center, and the bomb would keep going straight.
But what if the bomb drifted off course?
Well, then the target image would shift on the screen. Let's say the bomb veers to the left. Now the target will then appear on the right side of the screen.
Okay,
right?
So what it's doing is then shifting the crosshairs, if you will, to be on the target.
Right. Yeah. So, these pecks, they get detected by the sensors, right? Send signals to control surfaces like rudders or fins, and then the bomb corrects its course back towards the target. That's
actually quite brilliant, to be honest. So the pigeons are essentially chasing the image, and that chase behavior is what steers the missile. So that's amazing.
Right. It's kind of like using their natural behavior, right? Their incredible vision, their willingness to peck, right? And then you're kind of using that tendency, that behavior, and you're kind of honing it. You're kind of honing it and channeling it into this guidance system. And Skinner demonstrated that it worked.
I mean, they tested it. It was I guess it didn't go operational in the field. We'll get to that in a minute.
Right.
But they actually got this thing to work where they could guide essentially bombs into designated targets.
They did. And, Skinner even ran demonstrations for the military officials themselves, right? The pigeons actually did a good job during these demonstrations. They actually performed them beautifully. They were able to track the moving targets.
Okay, so it worked. All right,
it did.
So it worked. But why this never got implemented, right?
Yeah.
It never did get carried out.
It didn't. Unfortunately, the military was highly skeptical. They just could not take it seriously.
Because they were pigeons, right?
Yeah, because it was pigeons. I mean, can you imagine, being a military general in 1944, and then some psychologist, and by the way, the field of psychology at this point is fairly novel too, right?
True.
So psychologist comes and says, "Hey, I'd like to put some birds in your missiles." They probably thought he was crazy.
Yeah, definitely nuts. It sounds nuts. I mean, it sounds insane. And it's even more insane that it actually worked, to be honest. I mean, looking back, it actually makes perfect sense. But at the time, it must have been hugely revolutionary to think about, let's put something in the hands of these pigeons and train them to do what we can't do, which is guide these bombs onto targets.
Right. I mean, there are certainly some legitimate concerns, I mean, what if the pigeons were distracted? What if they got distracted? What if they saw something else that they wanted to peck? That would mess everything up, right? What if they just stopped caring, mid-flight? So, I mean, certainly there were some, I can understand the skepticism.
Right. And so, with all these unknowns, the military, probably was like, we can do better than this. We've been developing these radar systems, and why don't we just wait until this other technology matures?
Right. And so they ended up just kind of going with electronics.
Yep. So in October 1944, Project Pigeon was officially canceled. Funding dried up, and Skinner was left with a bunch of highly trained kamikaze pigeons and nothing to do with them.
Right. And so why don't you tell listeners what ended up happening to the pigeons then?
Well, so this is kind of like the, I think, inside story is that, Skinner, of course, kept some of them.
Oh, okay.
And get this, 6 years later, he tested them again, and they still remembered how to, this is incredible. They still remembered how to guide those missiles 6 years later. Right, the training was so deeply ingrained that it stuck with them.
Right. So I guess this is both the impressive part, but also in some ways, perhaps the sad part. Right. It's a little bit heartbreaking. It's sad. These pigeons were just kind of sitting around for 6 years. They were perhaps dreaming about the battleships. They really perhaps could have undergone perhaps the operation.
Yeah, and just think of all the seeds they missed too, right?
Right.
Like, oh boy, that was a good meal.
Right. So is that the end of the story, or
no? Well, not quite. 1948, the Navy actually revived the project. It was renamed Project Orcon, if I got that right, and gave it better funding, better technology. They improved the electronics that detected the pecking, refined some of the harnessing system, and all that stuff.
Okay, so did it work this time, or?
My understanding is it actually worked better. The technology had improved enough that the system was actually viable. But by 1953, radar and electronic guidance systems had advanced to the point where an organic, aka pigeon-driven guidance system was now obsolete. So they canceled it for good.
Oh, so close. I suppose Skinner must have been frustrated at that point.
Yeah, I think he was, but he also saw the bigger picture. What Project Pigeon really demonstrated was that operant conditioning works.
Right.
This was, probably for Skinner, a big step in sort of validating his life work in operant conditioning.
Right. So it kind of served as evidence, perhaps, for behavioral psychology.
Right. Sort of a proof of concept, so to speak.
Right.
So if you think about it, back in the 1940s, Skinner was already starting to think about how we can take psychology and begin applying it. So this is like, in some ways, just decades ahead of its time. We're talking about, now we call it human factor psychology, right? How can we take principles of human behavior and put those into operation in organizational or engineering settings?
Right. It's almost like early AI.
Right. If you think about it, right. So very early AI, except pigeon AI.
Right. Mike, I've really enjoyed doing this episode. I think it's been insightful. It's been very interesting to talk about.
Absolutely. And if people want to learn more about Project Pigeon, I guess we can just refer them to Google.
Yeah. So some links in the show notes.
That's right. So Project Pigeon, obviously, or at least from my perspective, one of the strangest, most fascinating chapters in the history of psychology and warfare. Again, if you want to learn more, you can just Google it or enter it into your favorite chat bot and get a summary of Project Pigeon.
Yep. Well, thanks for listening to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. I'm Joey.
I'm Mike.
And until next time.
Cheers.
Abby got the wisdom, dropping pearls on the mic. Ben with the insights, sharp as a spike. Mike's got the vibe, always keeping it chill. Joey cracks jokes, flexing comedy skills. Four minds collide, the convo's electric. Cracking the shell, peeling layers, eclectic. Topics on deck, from the D to the fun. Every episode's a journey, we've only begun. Cracking the shell, yeah, we're cracking it well.
Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science is a joint effort of my brilliant colleagues, Abby Nicholas, Ben Jones, Joey Barnett, and myself, Mike. This particular episode benefited from the use of Anthropic's Claude and Suno AI. If you enjoyed what you heard, or even if you didn't, be sure to subscribe, share it with your friends, or send us an email at crackingtheshellonpsychology@gmail.com. That's crackingtheshellonpsychology, one big long word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, those pesky little pigeons are probably a little bit smarter than you think.
Ideas, puts them to the test. Mike smooth to lick me's, cool as the breeze. Joey's punchlines hit, bring you to your knees. Crack the code, crack the case. Crack a smile, let it light up your face. Four voices, one rhythm, keep the pace. Podcast magic can't be replaced.